Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our PIARC webinar on the COVID-19 crisis. I'm very glad to have you here, and this is going to be our webinar number 10 in the series. So welcome, everyone. My name is Patrick Maléjac. I am the Secretary General of PIARC. So a couple of words about how we handle this webinar. First of all, please turn off your microphone and camera. This is for everyone's comfort during the session. You are very welcome to ask questions, to raise an issue, or to share a practice in your country or your organization. This is really, really welcome. If you want to do it, please use the chat feature of Zoom. Please text in your remark or question. This usually is in the bottom right of the main Zoom window. Send a message to all participants. Of course, focus on questions that are specific to roads or road transport. This channel on Zoom, the chat channel, is monitored by Christos Xenofontos, who is the chair of one of our PIARC committees. Christos will raise the questions to relevant panelists at the end of the session during the Q&A. So let me insist that you turn your cameras off for everyone. Thank you very much. About your name in Zoom. So it's when you enter Zoom, you are asked to give your name. It can be an acronym or anything. We invite you to name yourself rather accurately with your name and surname and your country. This is in order to help everyone know who is asking the question and also who is sharing a practice. You can do that by the function which is called rename in Zoom. I also invite the speakers in particular to do that as well, so that I can give you, can open your microphone when the time comes. The session is being recorded. There will be a video recording of our discussion, and it will be shared on our website at piarc.org. The PowerPoint presentations in PDF format will also be shared. They will even be translated to French and Spanish, and they will be shared on the same website. Disclaimer, well, everyone knows it's a crisis and time is of the essence. So what is going to be discussed today, knowledge and practice that is going to be shared by our panelists, will not have been officially approved by each country's official authorities. Maybe it will have been officially approved, but it's safer to assume that it has not been approved. So the ideas and examples shared here are for illustration only. They do not necessarily represent official policy. Of course, we have taken great care to prepare this material carefully, but we cannot accept any responsibility for damage that may be caused. The key concept is to focus on the short term. So the world is going through a crisis and every day counts. This is why we have intended to share knowledge and current practice between PIARC members urgently in order to support responses to the pandemic in near real time. So such knowledge and practice maybe have not yet confirmed, and they have probably not yet been confirmed as valid or effective. And what works in some parts of the world may not be relevant elsewhere. However, we hope that you in the audience will find inspiration here from what our panelists want to share with you, that a good idea now can help save lives in your countries, can help you improve your business resilience, and can help you minimize disruption of services. In parallel, at the same time, at PIARC, we are planning medium and long-term actions for when the crisis is in a manageable state and substantially under control. And then we will share best practice with the road and road transport community. We have decided to set up a response team in PIARC, and you have here the names and profile pictures of our colleagues. I'm very thankful to them who are working with us in this crisis and who have had the ideas to organize webinars and who are preparing briefing notes with us. You have here their names and functions within PIARC as well, and functions and jobs in their countries, because let's not forget, all our colleagues here are volunteers and operate really on a pro bono basis. The agenda and structure of our meeting today is as follows. It will start with a brief introduction to PIARC and to issues faced by road operators and administrations. And then we will move on to the panel part of our session. First, with Poland's response to the COVID-19 crisis. Then the Contractors Professional Association's response to the crisis. The first impacts of COVID-19 on Switzerland's travel. And then COVID-19 impact on transportation in Japan. Each of our panelists has about 12 to 15 minutes for their presentation. This will be followed by the questions and answers session, and then conclusion and next steps. We have planned that the session will last less than 2 hours, maybe an hour and 45 minutes. Our speakers today, well, as I said earlier, I'm very glad to have them here with us, and I'm very thankful because they have taken the time to prepare excellent presentations and to make themselves available today for their presentation and the questions. So myself, Secretary General of PIARC, Szymon Piechowiak, sorry if I don't pronounce it correctly, Deputy Director at the Road Authority in Poland, Michel Demarre from SEFI-FNTP, who is a Senior International Advisor there, Professor Kai Axhausen from ETH Zürich in Switzerland, and Jun Takeuchi from Japan, who is also a technical advisor at the General Secretariat of PIARC. Well, this is me, and it will be a very quick introduction about what PIARC is. So PIARC is the new name of the World Road Association. We were founded in 1909, so more than 110 years ago, as a non-profit, non-political association. Our goal is to organize exchange of knowledge on all matters related to roads and road transport. More particularly, more specifically, we aim at being a leading international forum for analysis and discussion of all topics related to roads and road transport. This is actually what we're doing today with you. We want to identify, develop, and disseminate best practice and give access to international information. This is what we do when we publish reports. On average, we publish one report every month. We want to consider within our activities the needs of developing countries and countries in transition, which are now called low and middle income countries. They are members in our committees. We organize seminars in those countries, and we also take into account their needs when developing our work plans. And if we talk about the COVID crisis, we have had quite a few speakers from those countries in our previous webinars. And we design, produce, and promote tools for decision-making, such as HDM4 or QRAM for dangerous goods transport in tunnels. How do we do that? We mobilize the expertise of our members, so 124 government members and experts, more than 1,000 experts from all over the world, who work in committees through operations guided by a 4-year work plan, which we call strategic plan. Then about the crisis, well, we have identified 6 key issues, which we think structure the situation rather accurately and usefully. Issue number 1 is that you need to ensure your employees' health and safety in general, right? Everyone does, and road authorities do need to do that in particular. And that's also the case for frontline employees, people who work in toll booths, etc. The second issue is that you need to maintain activity and business continuity. Roads need to be open. People need to be able to drive on roads. And you need to be able to identify processes that enable you to do that, even though some of your staff and some of your partners may be working from home, maybe are sick. And this is a disaster management type of situation. Third issue is, of course, the impact on transportation. In many countries, we have seen a sharp decrease in transport demand by as much as minus 90%. This means that the road operations are very significantly different from what they are in a business as usual context, and that revenues from road transport are also decreasing. The fifth issue is that you need to maintain excellent customer and stakeholder relations and be able to work jointly with a number of partners. If you want to use this time, because there are fewer drivers on the roads to engage, to pursue your roadworks projects, that might be a good idea, but you need the material and you need the staff and you need the contractors. You also need to work with the police forces. You also need to work with the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Health, maybe. And issue number 6 is security. Since many people are now working from home and working operations are quite significantly challenged as compared to what they usually are, many cybersecurity has become a threat. And this is something that is not a theory, it's happening in practice all over the world. So we need to discuss that as well. Those topics were presented in greater detail during our previous webinars. And the first note of synthesis is available from our website. It presents the emerging findings from the first 4 webinars. They are relevant for the road community and may be useful for you and may help you better plan and make better decisions on the ground. They're available from our website. It's free. It's available in English, French, and Spanish. So this is the introduction. As I said earlier, every question is welcome through the chat channel of this tool, this Zoom that we're using today. And I will then move on to our first panelist, Szymon. Well, the floor is yours. Please turn on your microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Okay, so great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. There are many things to cover, so I will try to go through all the things I have prepared. There are around 20 slides, but I will probably finish in this 12 to 15 minutes. So one more time, good afternoon. My name is Szymon Piechowiak from the National Road Administration in Poland, General Directorate for National Roads and Expressways. I'm working here for more than 1 year. Earlier, I worked for the Ministries of Infrastructure, Ministry of Construction, etc. So for now, I think now 5 years, I'm dealing professionally with construction sector. I'm also a spokesman of the General Directorate from 1st of April this year, so that's a new experience for me. Next slide, please. Briefly about the National Road Administration in Poland. We are responsible for development of road infrastructure in Poland. We are the largest public investors in terms of road investments. We are responsible for traffic management, asset management, of course, technology and road safety. What is important, we are not responsible for tolling system. This is other public entity which is responsible for this issue. Of course, we are cooperating with them. Next slide, please. Okay, so dealing with the pandemic, the most important thing within the construction sector or road construction sector is that we don't have administrative closure of construction sites. The constructions are ongoing on each and every of our construction sites. Contractors declare that they want to continue their work because they know that it's their future. If we will stop them or they will stop, probably in the future they will have troubles with operating of their companies. Of course, everything is in line, in compliance with safety and sanitary recommendations and orders which were issued by the government and the Ministry of Health. We think that the information now is the key. We are in touch with all the construction companies which are working for us on daily basis. They are sending us their troubles, their needs, and we are trying to respond as soon as it's possible. We are also working with the Ministry of Infrastructure, which is helping us to contact with the Council of Ministers, which is issuing all the all the orders or the recommendations, etc., etc. So next slide, please. I will just give a few examples what has changed since the outbreak of the state of epidemic. The most important thing is that the distance between workers or employees on the construction sites is now binding all the construction companies. So when there are people on the construction site, they have to keep the distance minimum 1.5 meters. If it is not possible due to the nature of the activities carried out, they have to be they have to wear gloves and other protective equipment, mask, etc. There are also restrictions on public transport, which apply to the vehicles with more than 9 seats. It includes all the transport. It applies to all the transport, public transport in the country, but also such example as buses or vehicles bringing people to the construction site. Other thing is hotels. They are open only for employees on business trips and working professionally, including those people working on construction sites. For other people, the hotels in Poland are closed. It will change in 1 week. From Monday, we are opening the hotels in accommodation, let's say, businesses. So, but the employees on the construction sites can use it all the time, so they can live somewhere close to the construction site. Next slide, please. This is like a summary with the graphics. So the minimum distance, hotels available for the workers, and restriction on collective transport. This is these are like the most, I think, important restrictions or orders which has been issued, and they have impact on the construction site. Next slide, please. Of course, there is a number of other recommendations and instructions implemented both by the government and by us, by the General Directorate for National Roads and Expressways. We are trying to work remotely in as many areas as it is possible. All the documentation which used to be, for example, signed in person, now it can be sent by email or other way. I mean, remotely. There are many points. You can use the presentation and read the presentation later. So I will move on. We are trying to make the situation as comfortable for the construction companies as it is possible right now in the circumstances which we are facing. We are trying to be as flexible as it is possible, but we have to remember that there are also other legal acts that we have to act. We have to act in line with those provisions. So we are flexible, but there are also we have some restrictions. Okay, so next slide, please. One of the main needs of the construction companies, of the construction sector, was or still is the flow of payments. So they have enough money to operate from week to week, from month to month. So we decided that we will speed up the payment, speed up the payment verification system, so that they can receive their money quicker than usually. And this is one of the main needs they have, and we answered very quickly. and we know that they are happy that they can see their money quicker than usually. Okay, so next slide, please. We had an issue with border control. Boundaries were closed, and the quarantine system was introduced. 13 days domestic quarantine introduced for the the quarantine system was introduced only for the passengers traveling, not for the transit business. So heavy trucks driver, they don't have to they don't have to have spent 14 days domestic quarantine. Others still have to. Here are some statistics on border crossings. Just before the pandemic situation, so 28 active border crossing. Then on March 15 we closed some of the border crossing, and then we had the huge queues at the borders, even 80 kilometers long at the German-Polish border. It was quite a problem for us. So next slide, please. So there were some. Here you can see these on the map where there are the borders which were open on March 15, and the blue ones are the additional open borders, which it was our response for the queues which were there on the borders. And the next slide, please. Yeah, here's the history of events. We closed some borders, then we have to reopen them because of the queues. We tried to work as fast as it was possible together with other public entities, for example, border guards, etc., etc. We also even built a new line during just 5 days, so there will be additional space for trucks and cars waiting for the crossing of the border. What was very important change was that everybody has to go through the sanitary control, and they had to fill out the questionnaire. So we let the truck drivers just go through the borders. So they only have to go through very quick sanitary control. They don't have to get out of the trucks, and they don't need to fill out any questionnaires. So the movement of trucks was very fluent. And the situation on the borders improved very much. Next slide, please. Traffic volume. Of course, we are monitoring this issue. There is a huge decrease in passengers vehicle traffics, up to 30 to 40% during working days, and 50 to 70% during weekends. When it comes to heavy vehicles traffic, the decrease is smaller. It's around 7 to 10% during working days, and around 15 to 30% during weekends. So we are monitoring this all the time, and publishing the data weekly on our website. Okay, next slide, please. When it comes to truck drivers, of course, we have to deliver normal everyday services. So travelers service points, and they are all open except the hotels and food service. I mean, restaurants, bars, etc., which were closed at the national level. So all the petrol station parking areas, etc., etc. These are still open, both for passengers, cars, and heavy trucks drivers. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think I've covered this one. So these are all open. There is access to travel for travelers. There are, of course, some situations when we have to close, for example, toilet, but it's only for example, cleaning. Okay, next slide. Unfortunately, we don't have very detailed data on fatal road accidents, etc., because this is the police headquarters is collecting these data, and they are issuing them. So, for example, data for March will be issued on probably on Monday. So we have only some information published on media. The general view is that there are less accidents. There are less accidents, but there are more fatal accidents when it comes to the number. Probably less cars on the roads, so people are speeding a lot, and that's why there are more fatal accidents. You can see the last sentence that the number of driving license which were detained for speeding increased nearly twice. So I think that the speeding issue is a problem, that there is an idea to lower the speed that you can drive, but they are still working on it. We think that it is not the issue, because it will be very difficult to control this. For example, we will have to change all the road signs, and it will be a lot of work. So there is no decision for now. When it comes to maintenance, of course, we are the road safety is, of course, our priority. We are trying to keep the roads as safe as they can be, even during the pandemic, this situation, this pandemic period. So all the maintenance work, the most important maintenance work, are carried out. These which are not necessary now are postponed, so we can keep the road safety level acceptable, and not, letting people working on the roads and get sick, for example, on coronavirus. So yeah, when it comes to our plans for 2020, we are. It probably will be next slide. So next slide.
Szymon, you have about 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So we are trying to be flexible we are trying to be flexible. Our plans for 2020 are still feasible and to accomplish. So we are we are signing new agreements, issuing new tenders, etc., etc. So we hope that the crisis won't affect the construction sector so much. We know that around 80% of staff is working on the construction side. We are not planning any delays or bigger delays. Of course, we have a problem with employees from abroad, which left Poland and went back to their countries. But as I said, 80% people are still working on the construction side. Next slide, please. Here is a statistic on our plans. So ongoing contracts, tenders, signed contracts, etc., etc. So a lot of things is going on. We are not stopping. The construction sector is not stopping, and so we hope that we will manage this pandemic situation. Next slide will be probably the last one. Yes. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I will try to answer them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Szymon. Thank you very much. That was a very detailed and very clear presentation. So as you said, I invite everyone to ask questions in the chat channel of the Zoom here. Don't hesitate. You're free to ask anything you want. Christos will do a very, very good job at handling that. Our next presentation is from the Contractors Professionals Associations. And Michel, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Good, thank you. Well, you have the title of my presentation. Just to introduce myself, I worked with the French government for 20 years, for the last 30 years with the private sector, mainly road construction companies. I am a past president of EIC, European International Contractors. I'm currently advisor to the French Association of International Contractors, SEFI. Even though I joined the private sector 30 years ago, I have remained a long-time member of PIARC since 1989. I participated in 3 technical committees since 2004. I was president of the French National Committee, and I'm currently the French-speaking secretary of Task Force 1.1 on well-prepared projects. I will make this presentation on behalf of CICA. What is CICA? Next slide. CICA is the Confederation of International Contractors Associations. It's a kind of global umbrella of contractors associations with a head office in Paris. CICA members are either regional members, such as FIEC, the European Federation of the Construction Industry, FIC, Federación Interamericana de la Industria de la Construcción in Latin America, FAC, Federation of Arab Contractors, but CICA also has national members in Canada, Japan, Korea, and even individual companies. The reason I focus today on CICA is that CICA has been acting as a clearinghouse and collecting COVID-19 related information from their members, bringing together updates made by regional organizations for their own area, in addition to other organizations and especially multilateral development banks. CICA publishes a global benchmark that is updated twice a week, and you have here the link to reach that update. My objective today is to present the point of view of the contracting industry as far as the pandemic is concerned and the role of professional organization at global, regional, and national levels. I'm simply following the presentation outline suggested by Patrick, and the first topic and main concern is, of course, ensuring employees' health and safety. It's really a primary concern for contractors. And in many countries, recommendations were published regarding appropriate safety measures to be adopted by contractors. Very often, these specific recommendations were drawn up jointly by a government or government agencies, professional associations, and possibly also trade unions. The poster on this slide is from the United States. You probably can't see it, but at the bottom you have famous names like FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, AASHTO, but also AGC, Associated General Contractors of America, ADBA, American Road and Transportation Builders Associations. That's just for illustrate the role taken by professional associations. Recommendations are either general or they may be specific to specific activities. For instance, in France, road contractors, pipe fitters have published their own recommendations, which are, of course, compliant with the general ones. There may be also differences regarding health and safety issues, regarding the type of environment you work in, and whether building is also associated with infrastructure. On this specific issue of health and safety, professional associations have organized training sessions. They are mainly aimed at SMEs, small and medium enterprises, but they are very important for those SMEs. And they have also organized pilot job sites. Next slides, please. What are the main results of this benchmark? They are quite similar. There are a couple of differences. Probably the most striking one is the distance regarding social distancing. It varies from 1 meter in France to, we've just heard Poland, 1.5 meter, same as Belgium, to 6 feet in the US. And you see on this illustration of FIEC is at 2 meters for Europe. What are the main issues identified? The big concern has been the availability of masks. It has become a kind of very rare supply. But also sanitizer and appropriate individual protection equipment. In some countries, water supply may even be a problem for hand washing and cleaning. We have also had some information really coming from other continents, mainly Africa, for instance, and it may be a problem sometimes. A contractor has to care not only about his own staff, but also about subcontractors that need specific equipment. Transport issues, we've heard this in the previous presentation. Individual transport sometimes privilege over the use of vans. Workers' accommodation and canteen can be a problem. Some countries have completely closed their hotels and restaurants. Training of foreign workers in some countries may be a problem. I have put a sentence here. How do you say social distancing in Swahili? If you Google that sentence, you will find an article in Devex, which is very interesting because it's not only about language issues, but also about sometimes cultural or even religious issues. And COVID-19 in this respect brings some additional problems compared with traditional health and safety recommendations, gloves, shoes, hard hats, and so on. This is a bit more complicated. And what we need to keep in mind is these are temporary measures, but they may last for quite a while until a vaccine is made available. Next slide, please. Maintaining activity and business continuity. Situation varies in different countries, from almost complete stop in France, for instance, to limited activity, as was outlined in the previous presentation. It's not only a contractor's issue, because I have mentioned in the previous slide some specific issues, and we may also consider the difficulty in having available staff. They may be on sick leave, but there are also other problems. Activity may be hindered by short supply of materials, equipment, and logistics. And activity may even be stopped by clients that are not necessarily ready or willing to resume work. We've heard that huge amounts of money are being made available by individual countries or central banks or multilateral development banks, which is a good news. But another issue arises as and when work resumes progressively, because business continuity will be faced with the dilemma of future tenders that need to be prepared urgently, and the risk of a possible COVID-19 second wave. So this is a very complex situation that requires a dialogue between all stakeholders. Next slide, please. Business relations. In a previous webinar, Fabio Pasquali presented a couple of suggestions. I have listed them here. They are, of course, debatable, but I think they go in the right direction. I will focus more on some contractual issues. Very often in the previous webinars, we have used the concept of force majeure. Force majeure is a French expression, so everybody can understand where this comes from. But force majeure does not exist everywhere. And even in those countries where it exists, it does not necessarily have the same meaning or entail the same consequences. It very much depends on the applicable law. But there may be a possibility to use other contract clauses, unforeseen events, hardship, and so on, that may lead to the consideration of additional costs and extension of time, possibly. I want to mention here that FIDIC, the International Federation of Consulting Engineers, have published a COVID-19 guidance memorandum. You can see the link here. I think it's all the most interesting since in developing countries, when contracts are financed by multilateral development banks, they often use FIDIC or FIDIC-like contracts. And there may be a couple of interesting recommendations to consider in this memorandum. FIDIC has brought a caveat. Expert legal advice should be obtained whenever appropriate. They do not pretend to solve legal problems, but they outline that, of course, the preferred option is always dialogue and cooperation between parties. Next slide, please. We should also consider how to deal with future contracts. This was mentioned already. Clients should continue to work and prepare new tenders and not adding an economic slowdown to the pandemic-related slowdown. There are certainly some uncertainties surrounding future contract conditions. Which additional costs should be included? What happens if there's a second wave? And of course, concession contracts bring problems of their own. But I will refer you here to the presentation made on April 8 by Bill Halkias. Business relations with other stakeholders need also to be considered with our own staff. I already mentioned issues of communication, providing the right equipment also, mobile phones, computers for those who work at home, cars possibly. There's an important point to consider, however, which is, at least in some countries, the criminal responsibility of contractors. It's not sufficient to meet requirements written in the recommendation to hold harmless contractors of any responsibility. And this may have a real impact. We also have some difficult, sometimes business relations with nearby residents. You have people who are confined and working at home, and they wonder why the construction guys are working down in the street. So that's another additional issue. But in all these cases, I think professional associations can play an important role. We mentioned already drafting appropriate health and safety recommendations, training actions, dialogue with workers' associations. I have provided here an example between European Federation of the Construction Industry and the European Federation of Building and Woodworkers. They provide, the professional associations also legal advice for their members, especially SMEs, sometimes even material help. And they are also lobbying their respective state and municipalities for work investments to pick up quickly after work resumption. Next slide, please. I will skip this because it's really not specific to our sector. I think all sectors that have put some of their employees working at home may face the same type of difficulties regarding security, but I wanted to make a mention of it anyway. Next slide, please. I think I'm done, Patrick. Hope I met the deadline. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Michel. You have done a very, very good job, and I'm glad that the structure that we have come up with has proved useful. Again, everyone, please feel free to ask questions to Michel, or maybe even to say that in your country, it did not happen as he said. That could be challenging, it could be interesting maybe, but that's more of a joke really. Our next panelist is Professor Kai Axhausen from Switzerland, who will present the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on travel in Switzerland. So, Kai, Yes, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to join you for this presentation of our ongoing work on tracking the impact of COVID-19 on travel and travel behavior. This is joint work together with Joe Malloy and Christoph Chevenkov, a PhD student at my group, as well as colleagues from Basel. Next slide. Clearly, we have to acknowledge the 1,200 volunteers who make it all possible. The ASTRA, the Swiss Federal Roads Authority, is providing some financial support for it. And clearly, we are embedded in an earlier project, which will become clear on the next slide, please. We did a study with financial support of the ASTRA and some other research funders to look at mobility pricing last fall. And we covered the French and German-speaking Switzerland. This were 3,700 people. I don't need to talk about that study here, but we saw that some of those continued to be tracked. So they never threw off the app we had installed. And when we saw in February that COVID was coming and that restrictions were also coming to Switzerland, we mobilized 1,200 of those to switch on the app again. So we have now a panel of about 1,200 people who are continuously tracking their locations using GPS. The app gives us some insight in the modes chosen, and if the respondents or participants fill it out, we also know purpose. These are things which we will add to later. Next slide, please. Now, the first question you have to ask, what was the impact? And One measure of this is how many people are mobile on any one day. How many people leave their home to go outside? And you can see that in March, it was about already a bit down from the normal level. And it dropped to kind of the lowest level, about 55% in the week after Switzerland announced its restrictions in week of March 16th. Since then, there's obviously the weekend. You can see, you see that the values are creeping up. So about 70%, 75% of people are leaving their home any one day. The question now is, how far do they go? Next slide. Now, this is kind of in many ways, the central result of what we have been doing. There is many ways in measuring travel behavior. Two of them are quite relevant. One is to measure the number of trips, i.e. movements between activities. And the other one is to look at what is called the activity space, which gives you an idea of the scope and scale of what people are covering. And you can see that for the weekday trips, the blue lines, there's a massive drop from about 5 trips per day to 3 trips a day. So 40% of the trip mating disappears. And on the weekend, it's similar, but at a lower level. And you can also see already that trip making is creeping up a tiny bit again. Now, where it's more dramatic is of the activity space, so the area which is covered by the movements people undertake. And here the collapse goes from about 200 square kilometers to about 40. So 80% of the area is not covered anymore. So people are restricting their behavior to be much, much more local. So that is kind of the key result. Now, if you go to the next slide, we also have a second panel in Switzerland, which is Intervista, which is a commercial panel, which was primarily set up to support advertisers. And we wanted to see whether our panel, which is a bit skewed because of its original design and purpose, how comparable we are. And while the exact levels are different, the trends are the same. And you can see that for males and females, there are substantial differences, in particular before March 16th. But after March 16th, the two genders aren't really behaving all that different, but at a much lower level. So here it drops from about 40 kilometers per day to only about 20 kilometers a day. Next slide. And clearly, one impact is to what extent are people employed in training or not working. And you can see the expected differences, which become a bit more attenuated in the post-COVID area, as some people still have to go to work, to the workplace, but many are allowed to work from home. And that obviously reduces total kilometers driven by mode. So, and you can see quite clearly that those who haven't been working still are below those who are working. Next slide. Now, one concern which you might have seen in the public discussions in the newspapers at different places is the differential impact by income. And here, because we know quite a lot about the social demographics of our respondents, we see how income impacts the reduction in total daily distances by income. And you can see quite well that before March 16th, the impact is already substantial, but there isn't much of a difference by income. And then for the weeks since, there is about a 10% difference by income between the different income bands. And here I don't show error bars, So we don't know yet to what extent this is statistically significant, but there is a difference made. And while generally the reductions are going up again, and there seemed to be in that week of April 13th, no difference between the income groups. In the last week, the income group difference is visible again. So yes, even in Switzerland, there are differences by income, but they aren't as striking as those reported for other places in other countries. Next slide, please. Now, the most dramatic change which we had is the change by mode. As you would expect, public transport has collapsed. In Switzerland, in our sample, only about 5%, 10% of the original public transport kilometerage is still being undertaken. Here we have differentiated by bus, tram, and train. These are all the lines at the bottom. The car has also seen a reduction, which is in line with the reduction of working at the workplace or at changing workplaces. But what is interesting is the dramatic increase in cycling. Obviously, from a low base, we had a nearly doubling of the cycling since then. Walking has also recovered and was in that week kind of back at the original level before the crisis, in the baseline, which we measured in 2019. So what is happening there? Next slide, please. Now, let's first look at walking. You can see the pattern of the starts of the walks by hour of the day in relation to the peak hour of the day. And you can see that the brown line shows the expected 3 peaks, a morning peak, a lunchtime peak, and an evening peak as people return and go for leisure activities. And you can see that this pattern nearly completely disappears in the COVID weeks. In particular, the morning peak disappears. Kind of people don't have to leave home, so they don't. But you see again that the pattern is kind of reasserting itself at a lower level. And at the weekend, we see that the pattern is starting to reestablishing itself. In particular, the last week, which I show here, the departures are nearly back up to where they were before. So what is happening there? I think it becomes even clearer when we look at cycling. Next slide. Now here, it's dramatic. The cycling pattern and the weekdays in the before pattern also have those 3 peaks. And you can see that the afternoons really become a preferred time to cycle. And it's even more obvious on the weekend. I would argue, and we have to look at it in more detail, most of this is leisure, and in particular sports and fitness. So people who can't go to the gym, who can't play football, who can't play soccer, who can't play volleyball, who have no chance to do physical activities, use the bicycle as a prime way of doing that. Again, remember, it starts from a slow base, but the increases are impressive. Next slide. Now, outlook. Where do we go from here? Now, this data set is obviously very rich. It's very large. It's now, for some people, we are covering nearly 6 months. So it's an unusual data set and an unusual time. Now, we can do a number of things which otherwise are impossible because you never have those changes observed before. So one question which needs to be asked is, how do you model the mode choice and the destination choice under such dynamic conditions? How do you implement all of those constraints in your modeling for the future, because the next wave is coming as surely as amen in the church. So we have to prepare and have to understand how people choose between those modes. How do they choose destinations in the future? And there are various ways of doing that in the literature, and we want to apply those methods and develop those methods further. Now, even more interesting is the question, will that experience, which people now have had for 5, 6, 8 weeks, kind of lead to learning? As you might know, in the literature, there has always been this claim, if you expose people to new alternatives, if you expose them to new possibilities, they will change. And now we have had that exposure, not for a good reason, but by force majeure, as we learned. But still, it would be interesting to find out if that happens. And we will try to obtain funding to maintain our panel as long as we can. And more importantly, we will try to motivate our participants to stay with us as long as we can. And the flip side of this behavioral change question is, are the preferences we see in our daily behavior stable? All of our transport models, all of our forecasts are predicated on the assumptions that what we observe today will be true in 5, 15, and 50 years. All the numbers are based on that assumption. And now we have an opportunity to see if that is true, if people have shifted in their preferences in a substantial way, which would affect public policy and therefore also later investment and operational decisions. And with that, I am done.
Thank you very much, Kai.
Oh, sorry, last thing. This is the link to the website where we update weekly reports on our on the study.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing this link, and thank you very much for your detailed detailed presentation of on the evolution in Switzerland. Thank you again. Questions are welcome of any sorts to Kai and to our other panelists. Fourth and last panelist is Jun Takeuchi, who will talk about the situation in Japan. Jun, please unmute your microphone. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having an opportunity to share the information. So I'm Jun Takeuchi, currently working as a technical advisor with ST3 in PIARC, and also originally have worked in Nexco Central as a civil engineer. Nexco Central is a one-way express company in Japan, operating and managing about 2,000 kilometers in central Japan. So today I will talk about how COVID-19 has affected transportation in Japan as a representative of the Japanese government, and sorry, not from the standpoint of my company. Next slide, please. At first, let me show the Japanese situation of the coronavirus. So this slide shows the change in the number of the confirmed cases of infection in Japan. The figure on the left shows the number of confirmed cases in each prefecture, with large cities such as Tokyo and Osaka showing the highest number of cases. And the graph on the right side shows the number of confirmed cases on a daily basis. The death number is over 300, and also currently the total number of infected people has exceeded about 10,000 in Japan nationwide. And also the Japanese policy is to cut the peak of newly infected cases and prevent the breakdown of the medical system through the approach called avoid 3S, closed space, closed place, and also the close contact settings. Next slide, please. This slide shows the 3 pillars of basic strategy established to combat COVID-19 in Japan. Japan's overall goal, consists of two parts, not only to maximize suppression of COVID-19 transmission, but also to minimize socio-economic damage. And to achieve this goal, the three pillars have been set up: early detection of early response to clusters, enhancement of intensive care and securing of medical service system, and behavior modification of citizens, such as avoiding the 3S, as I mentioned before, as much as possible. And also the government has set the target of 80% reduction of opportunities to meet people. To reach the target, they have provided information on the reduction rate to the public. Next slide, please. So against the background of this increasing number of the confirmed cases, the Prime Minister declared state of emergency for a month long in Tokyo and 6 other prefectures in mid-April. Then he expanded the areas for state of emergency nationwide 10 days later. In the case of Tokyo, residents are strongly requested to stay home, except for activities such as receiving medical treatment and buying food. So in response, the government has taken the initiative to consider and implement measures against COVID-19 for all business areas, including infrastructure and street. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the behavior modification of citizens in Tokyo. So look at the left side of the slide. It shows the change in people flow at major stations in Tokyo. In response to the state of emergency, Japan's major stations, Shinjuku and Shibuya, have seen a population decline of about 40 to 55%. Compared to mid-February, before the spread of the corona infection in Japan, the population decline of about 70% was observed. So we can assume that the state of emergency has had a certain effect on the restriction of outgoing. And the graph on the right side shows the ratio of the number of passengers on the subways operated in Tokyo during the commuting time in the morning. As you can see in this graph, there has been a gradual decline in the number of passengers. In mid-April, it was found that the number of passengers dropped to about 65% during 7:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. in the morning. Next slide, please. So this figure shows, the figure on the left side shows the rate of population change at Tokyo Station. Like the station mentioned before, the population has been decreasing to about 50% compared to before declaration. And the graph in the middle shows the daily population ratio at Tokyo Station from the January to April. The orange bars are the number for weekend, and the blue bars are for the weekdays. Overall, you can see the decline in the population in Tokyo area. And the figure on the right side shows the number of passengers at Tokyo Station. So we can observe the decrease in 86% compared to the last year. So as a result, the detailed analysis has not been obtained, but we might say that COVID-19 has had a significant impact on the railway business. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's move on to the road transportation sectors. So how has the COVID-19 had an impact on traffic volume of expressways in Japan? So this graph shows the ratio of the weekly traffic volume to the previous year of the three categories: all vehicles, small-sized vehicle, and large-sized vehicle for each company. The solid line shows the all vehicles. The dotted line shows the small size, and the dashed line shows the large-sized vehicle. Since the mid-March, when the number of infected people has gradually increased, we have seen a gradual decrease in the traffic volume. The volume of all vehicles has dropped to about 70% in each company in mid-April. Regarding the volume of small-sized vehicle, it is down to 50 to 60%. And on the other hand, the volume of large-sized vehicle has seen the decline only to 80 to 90% in Japan. So the detailed analysis has not been obtained, but it can be assumed that many people avoid going out for sightseeing by small-sized vehicles. On the contrary, the volume of large-sized vehicle, which may be linked in the business, has not been decreased. Next slide, please. So this chart, I'm sorry, this is a very small letter. So this chart shows the measures against COVID-19 disseminated by the Ministry for Road Transportation Sector. The Ministry, Emirate is Ministry, and expressway companies and the local government are adjusting their operations by changing the way of operating according to this chart. The left column shows the measures taken by the government, the middle one by the expressway companies, and the right column by the local government. The measures have been organized into the several categories: employee management, business continuity, and various measures such as approaches to promote voluntary restraint of cross-regional trips. So out of this detailed chart, we have extracted some primary ones and organized them according to the PIARC classification of key issues. Next slide, please. So the first is ensuring employees' health and safety. Ministry and expressway company and the local government have reduced commute of employees by promoting working at home, teleworking. Then they have disseminated and implemented infection prevention measures such as placing antiseptic solution and also the voluntary restraint of events. Moreover, the government have supported to secure masks and the antiseptic solution for expressway companies and roadside stations. Okay, second one is maintaining activity and business continuity. They have taken anti-cluster measures with a backup system of staff, and they have taken permitted logistics of heavy vehicles relating to COVID-19 response with priority to pass expressways, such as a shipment of the hygiene products. And moreover, they have simplified the process for occupying roads and extend the collection period of occupation fields. Next slide, please. The third one is the business relations. If work cannot be carried out, we can take measures to suspend road works and services such as construction and operation projects temporarily. As a financial support, they have promoted special measures of employment support grant for roadside station or so. And fourth one is a customer and stakeholder relations at joint working. They have called for the voluntary restraint trips at the roadside or so, and also the barrier message signboard on expressways, TV, radio, website, and the SNS have been used. Also, they have suppressed the trips on expressway during the Golden Week holidays, that the Japanese long vacation season. actually it is now. So by suspending expressway toll discount and requesting voluntary closing of restaurant at service area also. Next slide, please. Oh, this slide shows a specific description of measures taken by expressways companies. The first one is that through the Road Traffic Information Center and the highway radio, they have asked people to avoid going out, especially when traveling across prefectures. And also, we have used the website, SNS, and about the number 3, so about the 1,200 information board mentions on the expressway, please avoid non-necessary or non-urgent trips, particularly to outside the prefecture. And also at the service posters and voice announcements have also been used at about 700 service area and parking area nationwide. So now the main COVID-19 measures taken by the expressway companies have begun in the middle of April. So then the further new measures may be needed considering this situation. So next slide, please. Oh, this is the final slide. So I hope that this information is beneficial to you. And also, I think that we need to think about what measures is necessary and effective for the coronavirus infection, such as pandemic. Okay, thank you so much. That's it for.
Thank you, June. Thank you for your very detailed presentation about the situation and the measures in Japan. Thank you to our 4 panelists. And then I think we can move on to our questions and answers section of the session today. It's moderated by Christos. The speakers and panelists' names are on the screen now. Christos, do you want to handle this? Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm unmuted. Thank you very much, Patrick. And a greater thank you to our panelists and our attendees for being here today and for sharing their experience and material. So our first question, since we had June on it, you know, at the very end, I will start with June. After COVID-19 is controlled by these measures, what do you think will be needed as a next step in terms of the government? Can we unmute June, please?
Oh, sorry. Oh, thank you, Christos. Thank you for good. Oh, this is a good point. So for the government, in the loans business, the supply chain have been severely damaged by the suspension of construction in Japan. So the Japanese government considers that the road public works, road public investment will be needed as an economic stimulus measures. So, but since this is the first experience for every country, Japan will don't know which way is better or not. So the Japan would like to see if the other countries will implement road public investment, road public works. So now they are considering that if the participant can cooperate it, could you send the email to whether your company consider public works or not, if possible by the middle of next week. This kind of information in other countries will be helpful for Japanese government. Thank you.
June, thank you very much. And, you know, for the sake of everyone else, you know, if you could please respond back to June, and his information would be included on the slides as well. That would be great. This gives us a great opportunity to share information with each other and sometimes be able to better prepare, you know, as we move forward. The next question is to Szymon, and comes from Tiago in South Africa. And it appears that contractors do not suspend the work on site. Is this the decision of the contractors themselves, or is this coming down from the government?
I can say that this is the decision of both contractors and the government. Contractors decided not to stop, and government decided not to say them to stop. So the government just asked them, the contractors, the construction company, to go in line with all the requirements, safety requirements on construction site, and if they fulfill all the requirements, they can continue their work, because the government know that the construction sectors is one of the most important sectors in all the economy. So it has to continue its work. Thank you.
Thank you, Szymon. And the next question, actually, it's to both you and Michel. And since you already have the microphone, we'll start with you. Is how do you enforce the physical distance between employees out on the construction side when some operations require 2 or 3 people working together in order to accomplish it?
If the nature of the work which has to be done needs the people to be closer than 1.5 meters, they can be closer, but then they have to use the gloves and the mask. That's all.
Okay, Michel.
Well, it would be a similar answer, but definitely this may be very tricky in some instances. It's probably less tricky in roadworks than it might be in building works, but yet it is still a big problem. But I have no other answer than the one provided by Szymon. You've got to wear masks, knowing that it's a big difficulty. If you respect the rule to change mask every 3 hours, you would need 4 masks per person each day, which is, and I mentioned this as a big issue in European countries.
And Michel, since the next question is also for you, and do you think that contracting firms need any incentive to respect the update time schedule of works? And do you think that things will settle down without any client's intervention?
Well, I mentioned earlier in my presentation that especially in those countries that came to a almost complete halt on March 17, and I'm thinking of France, but there are some other countries. There has to be a dialogue between the client and the contractors to try and determine new completion dates. Now, it's difficult to answer this question because there are different cases. If we speak about a rather short contract, say 3-month contract, and you have stopped for 1.5 months, obviously you cannot speed up the implementation, and you need an extension of time. It remains to be seen whether this extension of time is realistic or not, depending on specific conditions, including availability of staff. It's of course different if you have a 2-year contract. You have there many more uncertainties, as I mentioned before. What happens if there is a second wave? But altogether, I think that once you have come up with the adequate measures, you should be able to define a rather realistic date for those contracts that are, again, long contracts. We have plenty, for instance, in Paris now, we have a huge Paris Express metro system about 200 kilometers of tunnels that is being implemented. So you would say tunnels, that's not the road. But each time there is a station, it impacts the road or street networks in a heavy way. And then you need to have some road measures as well. And in that case, you need to consider the whole contract, and it's obviously very tricky. I mentioned this in my presentation. There are many uncertainties related to maintaining the continuity of the work. Now, I think there's no better answer to say that, again, clients and contractors need to sit around the table and find the most reasonable solution, and possibly anticipate future events.
Thank you, Michel. Kai, the next couple of questions, are coming towards you, and it seems like what you share relative to the increase in bicycling and pedestrians that solicited a couple of different questions, of very similar questions. And the question is the recovery and increase in the use of the bicycle also related to the weather and getting better weather? Or is it the desire to go out now is so great that even in bad conditions, but maybe not in bad weather, the cyclists still prefer to go out? And the parallel question to that is there a fear of people using public transit now, and that's why they opt to use modes of transport that they can do individually? And would that increase, have you seen an increase in the rate of accidents for bicyclists and pedestrians?
Okay, start with the last. I haven't looked at accident numbers, but there is certainly no reporting in the press. And given the strong reduction in car traffic as well, I wouldn't expect it at this time. It's really a chance for bicyclists to actually avoid the pedestrians by actually traveling on the road where they actually should travel in any case. Now, with the weather, we are comparing it with the fall of 2019, and both periods were actually good weather periods. And yes, we will do more control for the weather impact. We have access to Swiss national data, which covers the whole year. So we can look at the weather impact. I would say yes, probably the good weather of the last 4 weeks had an impact and invited people to explore, but it's beyond that. I think the impact is much stronger than just the usual uptake in bicycle travel as the weather becomes better. So yes, some weather, but it's more than that. And in particular, the impact, what you see on the weekend, that's well above the usual changes.
Thank you, Kai. So one of the comments that came through the chat as well was that in London, people who work in the offices but are now working from home have gained an average of 2 hours per day, which, of course, affects the leisure activities, including cycling. Do you see that as becoming permanent if teleworking and telecommuting remains part of a new norm?
I would guess some of this will happen. And now, if we assume that, let's say, 20 or 30% of the work trips will be replaced by working at home, but no corona restrictions, it's not yet quite clear what the equilibrium will be, because from the cyclist perspective, they would be to some extent crowded out by the resurgent car traffic. And that will put a damper on it. So I think, yes, some of it will happen, but probably not to the extent we are seeing it now. And that's really why we want to, if at all possible, to extend the panel into the after period so that we can see what happens, and why we want to essentially do detailed modeling to understand what has really changed in the behavioral judgments of the travelers.
And thank you again, Kai. The next question is to Michel. Michel, how large is the sample and representation of less developed countries in CICA? And do you have the latest inputs related to the last 4 and 5 weeks?
For the last input, I would recommend that you follow the link I provided in the in my presentation to the CICA update. You have also, I think, on the website, you have not only the last update, but you also have the previous ones. So that would be my best advice. As far as the membership within CICA is concerned, we do not have any strictly African representatives. Unfortunately, there's no such thing as the Regional Association of African Contractors, but we have some information through other channels. For instance, South Africa, that is a steady member of PIARC, has helped CICA find relevant elements, and there is an association of builders. I don't remember exactly the acronym, but we were in touch with this South African Builders Association. We also have information regarding the what happens in Africa through contractors that notably European contractors that work in Africa and that can report on the situation there. And we also have, again, contact with multilateral development banks, and this is very helpful for us to learn more about what's happening in Africa.
Thank you, Michel. Our next question is to Szymon, it's coming from Mariano Baron in Argentina, where in South America they have seen increasing cases of COVID-19 among truck drivers, and mostly those working internationally, as when they are in the middle of their trip and they are outside, the city environment, they apparently feel safe as they tend to relate, COVID-19 only to cities and not necessarily to people. And are you detecting something similar, particularly with the international crossings that you have?
I haven't heard that the truck drivers in Poland were like special group with the increased number of cases of COVID-19. We don't have such data, and as I mentioned, I haven't heard of such cases. The restrictions are the same both in the city and outside the city. We've heard that when they're loading the trucks, they try to stay in the truck so they can just get to the loading center, get the truck loaded, and they are just going back. So they have so they just don't have contact with other people. So that's what I can say when it comes to this issue.
Thank you, Szymon. And the next one, I'll ask Kai if I may. And in some of the previous webinars, we have seen that post-COVID-19, particularly like in China, where they're coming after they are already in post-COVID-19, there is an increased use of private vehicles and a reduction in the transit ridership. Is this something that you are beginning to see from your analysis so far, Kai, or is this too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell for us because Switzerland has only lifted restriction more widely this week and not really yet fully. I think many more people are now reminded that close quarters in buses and trams and trains are dangerous potentially. And that's true for the generic flu, which we have had every year since forever. But it's now much more obvious to everyone. And I think public transport will have a reduction in its use with the attendant increase in particular of car driving, but also of cycling in the summer. We will have to see how that balances out, because the increased congestion on the road, in particular in cities which were loaded already before, will again provide a dampening to that effect.
Thank you, Kai. It will be interesting to follow this trend, and you know, as we work on future webinars post the crisis stage that we are in right now, to actually do a follow-up, you know, and see how some of these trends are continuing.
That's a very good idea.
That's a last question would be to Michel, and it's relative to whether there has been any comparative study already done, or if there is an intention to do a comparative study on whether where public works have continued, if they have become a special vector for the spread of the disease compared to other essential sectors such as industry, food, or banking, for example.
I'm not aware of any such study, especially if you consider that in many countries construction came almost to a complete halt. So it was not possible to measure any contamination whatsoever on these particular job sites. But I will look for it. I've not heard about it. I don't think it has been possible so far, but maybe in the future there will be some sort of study about that. I will check that.
Thank you, Michel. And on behalf of all of us, I would like to thank our panelists again, our attendees, and end by asking one last question to Patrick, please, relative to what else is PIARC planning relative to this? I know you mentioned earlier about the short-term, mid-term, and long-term action. So if you could tell a little bit more to us, Patrick, it would be great.
Well, thank you, Christus. Yes, the usual disclaimer, you saw it already. Well, we have planned future webinars. We have a French language webinar planned for tomorrow, actually, and a Spanish language webinar planned for next week on Tuesday. So if you are interested in this, please contact us at info@piarc.org. We're also planning a webinar next week on freight specifically. Further down the road, we are considering other webinars on urban issues, and more interestingly, urban issues in a post-crisis context, which relates quite well with the discussions we had just now about biking, for example, and future webinars quite possibly on financing and the impact of the crisis on financing road maintenance, for example. So I invite you to check those from our website. Since you have registered for today, I just want to remind audience members that they will be contacted and invited to register for those future webinars. We also have published a note, the first one with the findings from our first 4 webinars. Future such notes are planned. On the more medium term, we are also planning to review the terms of reference of some of our committees, such as the Road Network Operations Committee or the Freight Committee, for example, so that they would reflect on what has happened and really analyze what were the best practice from the vast roster of experiences that we have collected. It would not be easy because, as we have seen, confinement, lockdown does not mean the same thing in different countries. Local legislations, local cultures are very different, and it will be a tall order for us to identify a best practice that could be relevant for all. but we will certainly do our best and try. Here on the page, you can see the web page from our website that is where we collect all the information that we have on the virus, information from PIARC as well as information from other organizations. So if you are aware of something that's really important, of an organization that really does a great job now, please let us know. 2 polls are open as well, and I will conclude with this. If you want to express that this topic or that topic is an issue of concern for your organization, please use the first poll. The second poll is about people who would like to share their practice as a panelist in a future webinar. So please use that if you want to speak next time. Those 2 links, of course, are very complex addresses. They are available from PIARC's website as well. So with this, Christos, I would like to thank everyone, thank the panelists for the excellent job that they have done, and thank the audience as well for having taken the time to be with us today. And I hope that this has proved useful for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.